The first time my grandson raised his hand to me, I told myself it was an accident. After all, how could the little boy who once traced his finger along my wrinkled cheeks and called me his angel grandma deliberately hurt the woman who had changed his diapers and sung him lullabies? But bruises don't lie, even when our hearts desperately want to. My name is Eleanor, and at 80 years old, I thought I'd seen the worst that life could offer. I had buried my husband of 53 years, watched friends fade away one by one, and felt my body betray me with arthritis that made simple tasks feel like mountains to climb. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared me for the day my own flesh and blood would become my tormentor. It started so gradually that I almost missed it. Tyler had always been different from other children, even as a baby. Where other infants gurgled and smiled, he would stare with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. As he grew, his tantrums weren't just typical childhood outbursts. They were volcanic eruptions of rage that seemed to come from somewhere much deeper and darker than a child's disappointed wants. His parents, my daughter Sarah and her husband Mark, were young professionals who worked long hours and traveled frequently. When Tyler was 12, they asked if he could stay with me during their 3-week business trip to Europe. "Just this once, Mom," Sarah had pleaded over the phone. "You know how much Tyler loves spending time with you." The irony of those words would haunt me for years to come. The first week went smoothly enough. Tyler helped me tend to my small garden, and we baked cookies together. Chocolate chip, his favorite since he was old enough to hold a spoon. We watched old movies on my ancient television set, and I told him stories about his grandfather, my beloved Harold, who had passed away 5 years earlier. For those precious days, he was the sweet boy I remembered, the one who used to climb into my lap and fall asleep to the sound of my heartbeat. But something shifted during the second week. Tyler became increasingly agitated when I couldn't keep up with his demands. When I moved too slowly getting his breakfast ready, he would slam his fist on the kitchen table. When I asked him to help with simple chores, he would roll his eyes and mutter under his breath. I attributed it to adolescence, that difficult phase all children go through. If only I had known then what I know now. The first incident happened on a Tuesday morning. I had been struggling with a stubborn jar of pickles, my arthritic hands simply not strong enough to twist the lid open. Tyler had been playing video games in the living room, and I called to him for help. When he didn't respond after several attempts, I walked slowly to where he sat, controller in hand, eyes glued to the violent images flashing across the screen. "Tyler, sweetheart," I said gently, placing my weathered hand on his shoulder. "Could you help Grandma with—" He whirled around so fast that I stumbled backward. His face was contorted with a rage that seemed far too mature for his 12-year-old features. "Can't you see I'm busy?" he screamed. And then something in his eyes shifted. Without warning, he shoved me hard in the chest. I fell backward onto the hardwood floor, my hip connecting with the ground in a way that sent lightning bolts of pain shooting through my entire body. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Not from the physical impact, but from the shock of what had just happened. As I lay there, staring up at the ceiling fan that Harold had installed 20 years ago, I heard Tyler's footsteps retreating to his room, followed by the slam of his door. I told myself it was an accident. He was frustrated, caught up in his game, and didn't realize his own strength. Children don't understand how fragile elderly bodies can be. These were the lies I whispered to myself as I struggled to stand, as I nursed the bruise that bloomed across my hip like a dark flower. When Sarah called that evening to check on us, Tyler was back to his charming self, chatting animatedly about our baking adventures and telling her how much he missed her. I said nothing about the incident. What would have been the point? It was just an accident, after all. But accidents, I learned, have a way of repeating themselves when we're too afraid to call them by their real name. The psychological manipulation began subtly, woven into everyday interactions like poison threaded through silk. Tyler would forget to help me with tasks that were becoming increasingly difficult for me to manage alone. When I would ask for assistance, he would sigh dramatically and make comments about how helpless I was becoming. "Grandma, you're so slow," he would say with mock concern. "Maybe you should be in a nursing home where people can take care of you properly." Those words cut deeper than any physical blow. The nursing home had been my greatest fear since Harold's death. I had seen friends disappear into those sterile places, their spirits dimming like candles in the wind. The thought of spending my final year surrounded by strangers, forgotten by family, was more terrifying than anything else I could imagine. Tyler seemed to sense this fear and used it like a scalpel, making precise cuts to my confidence and sense of worth. He would hide my glasses, my reading material, my medications, and then act innocent when I frantically searched for them. "Maybe your memory's going, Grandma," he would say with fake sympathy. "That's what happens to old people." The gaslighting was so expertly done that I began to question my own reality. When I was certain I'd left my book on the kitchen table, only to find it in the garage, I wondered if my mind was indeed failing me. When my prescription bottles went missing for days, only to reappear in places I was sure I hadn't put them, I began to doubt my own memory. Tyler had learned to read people's weaknesses with the precision of a surgeon. He knew that my greatest vulnerability wasn't my physical frailty. It was my desperate need to be needed, to matter to someone in this world where I felt increasingly invisible. He exploited this need ruthlessly, alternating between cruel indifference and sudden bursts of affection that left me grateful and confused. "I love you, Grandma," he would say after a particularly harsh day, climbing onto my lap like he used to when he was small. "You're the only one who really understands me." And in those moments, my heart would soar with the old familiar love, making me forget the cruelty, the manipulation, the growing fear that had begun to live in my chest like a stone. The physical abuse escalated gradually. What started as accidental shoves became deliberate pushes when I moved too slowly. If I took too long preparing his meals, he would grab my wrist and squeeze until I gasped, his young fingers surprisingly strong against my paper-thin skin. "Hurry up," he would hiss, his breath hot against my ear. "I'm hungry." One evening, about 6 months into what I now recognize as my captivity, Tyler became enraged when I suggested we call his parents to say goodnight. His reaction was swift and terrifying. He grabbed the phone from my hands and threw it against the wall, where it shattered into pieces. Then he turned on me with a fury that seemed to transform his entire being. "You stupid old woman," he screamed, his face red with rage. "They don't want to talk to you. They only put up with you because they have to." His words were like daggers, each one finding its mark with devastating accuracy. But it was what came next that truly broke something inside me. He raised his hand and slapped me across the face with such force that I saw stars. The sound echoed through the quiet house like a gunshot. As I touched my stinging cheek, tasting blood from where my teeth had cut the inside of my mouth, Tyler's expression changed. For just a moment, I saw something that might have been remorse flicker across his features. But then his face hardened again. "If you tell anyone about this, I'll tell them you hit me first," he said with chilling calm. "Who do you think they'll believe? A crazy old woman or their beloved grandson?" That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my cheek throbbing and my heart shattered. The house that had once been my sanctuary, filled with memories of Harold and happier times, now felt like a prison. Every creak of the floorboards made me tense, wondering if Tyler was coming to my room, wondering what new torment awaited me. I began to understand why victims of abuse stay silent. It wasn't just fear of not being believed, though that fear was very real. It was the complex web of shame, love, dependency, and terror that traps you more effectively than any physical chains ever could. I was financially dependent on my family, My body was failing me, and I had nowhere else to go. But more than that, admitting what was happening would mean acknowledging that the little boy I had loved and cherished had become my enemy. The isolation was perhaps the cruelest aspect of my situation. Tyler had effectively cut off my connections to the outside world. He would intercept phone calls, telling callers I was sleeping or not feeling well. When neighbors stopped by, he would answer the door with such polite charm that they never suspected anything was wrong. "Grandma's having one of her bad days," he would explain with practiced concern. "The doctor says she needs lots of rest." My few remaining friends gradually stopped calling, stopped visiting. I became a ghost in my own life, invisible and voiceless. The woman who had once been active in her church, who had volunteered at the local hospital, who had hosted holiday dinners for dozens of relatives, slowly disappeared. Tyler's control extended to every aspect of my daily existence. He decided what I could eat, when I could bathe, what I could watch on television. If I tried to assert any independence, the consequences were swift and painful. A twisted arm here, a harsh shove there, always followed by threats that chilled me to the bone. "Remember, Grandma," he would whisper during his worst moments. "If you make me angry, I might have to tell Mom and Dad about all the times you fall down. They're already worried about you living alone. One more incident, and they'll have no choice but to put you in a home." The threat of the nursing home hung over me like a sword, keeping me compliant and silent. I had become a prisoner in my own home, guarded by a child who wielded power over me with the casual cruelty of someone who had learned that vulnerability was weakness to be exploited. But human beings are remarkably resilient creatures, even at 80 years old. Somewhere deep inside me, beneath the fear and shame and crushing loneliness, a tiny flame of defiance still flickered. It was fed by memories of the woman I used to be. The woman who had raised 4 children, who had worked 2 jobs to help Harold build our life together, who had survived the Great Depression and 2 wars and the death of a child. I began to notice things about Tyler that I had missed before, or perhaps had chosen not to see. The way he could switch from rage to charm in an instant when someone else was around. The calculated nature of his cruelty, always careful to hurt me in places that wouldn't show, or in ways that could be explained away as accidents. The manipulation was too sophisticated, too deliberate for a typical troubled child. One afternoon, while Tyler was at school, I managed to use my neighbor's phone to call my doctor's office. My hands shook as I dialed, terrified that Tyler would somehow know what I had done. I made an appointment under the pretense of a routine checkup, knowing that Dr. Martinez had been my physician for 15 years, and might notice things that others had missed. The day of my appointment, Tyler insisted on coming with me. "I want to make sure Grandma tells the doctor about all her falls," he said sweetly to the receptionist, who smiled at what she perceived as a caring grandson. But I caught the warning look he shot me, the subtle reminder of what would happen if I spoke out of turn. Dr. Martinez examined me with his usual thoroughness, and I could see the concern in his eyes as he noted the various bruises in different stages of healing. When he asked about them, Tyler was quick to answer before I could speak. "Grandma's been having some balance issues," he explained with practiced concern. "She's fallen down the stairs twice this month, and she bumped into the kitchen counter yesterday. We're really worried about her." I opened my mouth to speak, to tell the truth that was burning inside me like acid. But Tyler's hand found mine and squeezed it in what looked like comfort, but felt like a threat. The words died in my throat, replaced by a weak smile and a nod of agreement. That night, Tyler's rage was worse than anything I'd experienced before. He had somehow sensed my moment of near rebellion in the doctor's office, and his punishment was swift and brutal. He pushed me down the stairs, not enough to cause serious injury, but enough to ensure I would be covered in authentic bruises that would support his story of my clumsiness. As I lay at the bottom of the stairs, my body screaming in pain, and my spirit more broken than ever, I realized that I was going to die in this house. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually. Tyler's violence was escalating, and my body was growing frailer. One day he would push too hard, or hit too violently, and that would be the end of Eleanor's story. The thought should have terrified me, but instead, it sparked something unexpected. Anger. Real white-hot anger that burned through the fear and shame and despair. I was going to die anyway. We all were. But I would be damned if I was going to let this child erase me without a fight. It took me 3 weeks to work up the courage to act. 3 weeks of planning and preparing, of finding moments when Tyler was distracted to make my preparations. I couldn't call for help from my house. Tyler monitored the phone too closely. I couldn't rely on visitors. He had successfully isolated me from everyone who might have helped. But Tyler was still a child, and children have to go to school. On a Tuesday morning in October, after Tyler had left for his classes, I did something I hadn't done in months. I left my house. Every step was agony. My body was a map of Tyler's violence, each bruise and tender spot a reminder of my captivity. But I forced myself to keep moving, one painful step at a time, until I reached the small police station 3 blocks away. The officer at the front desk was a young woman, maybe 30 years old, with kind eyes and a gentle manner. When she saw me shuffling through the door, obviously injured and distressed, she immediately came around the counter to help me. "Ma'am, are you all right? Do you need medical attention?" I looked at this young woman, someone's daughter, someone's hope for the future. And I realized that I was not just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for every elderly person who had ever been trapped in silence, every victim who had ever been too afraid to speak their truth. "My name is Eleanor Patterson," I said, my voice stronger than it had been in months. "And I need to report that I'm being abused by my 12-year-old grandson." The words hung in the air between us, and I saw the shock and confusion in the officer's eyes. Child abuse was something they were trained for, prepared to handle. But an elderly woman being abused by a child. This was uncharted territory. What followed was a blur of interviews, medical examinations, phone calls, and social workers. Tyler was removed from my home that same day, his charming mask finally slipping when he realized that his power over me had been broken. His parents, called back from their latest business trip, were devastated and disbelieving. "But Mom," Sarah cried, "Tyler loves you so much. He's always talking about his wonderful grandmother. There must be some mistake." The mistake, I gently explained to my daughter, was in believing that children were incapable of deliberate cruelty, that age automatically conferred innocence. Tyler was evaluated by psychologists and eventually diagnosed with conduct disorder, a condition that had been brewing beneath the surface for years, hidden by his ability to manipulate and charm. The road to recovery was long and painful. I had to rebuild my confidence, reclaim my voice, and learn to trust my own perceptions again. Therapy helped, as did the support of social workers who specialized in elder abuse. I learned that my experience, while shocking to many, was not as uncommon as people like to believe. Tyler received the help he needed, intensive therapy and residential treatment designed to address his behavioral issues. I like to think that early intervention made a difference, that he learned to control the impulses that had made him my tormentor. I hope that he grew up to be a better person than the child who had terrorized me. As for me, I discovered reserves of strength I never knew I possessed. At 80 years old, I started over. I reconnected with old friends, made new ones, and became an advocate for elder abuse awareness. I shared my story with social workers, police officers, and healthcare providers, helping them recognize the signs they might have missed. I learned that survival isn't just about enduring. It's about reclaiming your power, your voice, your right to be treated with dignity and respect. Age doesn't diminish our worth, and being elderly doesn't mean we have to accept abuse from anyone. regardless of their relationship to us. The house where I had been held captive became a home again. I filled it with friends and laughter, and the sound of my own voice speaking my own truth. The kitchen where Tyler had controlled my every meal became a place where I cooked for church potlucks and neighborhood gatherings. The living room where he had isolated me from the world became a gathering place for other survivors who needed to hear that they were not alone. Some nights when the arthritis in my joints reminded me of my age and the memories threatened to overwhelm me, I would think about that moment in the police station when I found my voice again. I would remember the look in that young officer's eyes when she realized she was witnessing an act of incredible courage. An 80-year-old woman choosing to fight rather than fade away. They say that courage isn't the absence of fear, but action in spite of it. If that's true, then I was the most courageous person I knew during those dark months when I chose to survive, chose to speak, chose to believe that I deserved better than the hell my grandson had created for me. I'm 87 years old now, and my body has continued its inevitable decline. But my spirit, the part of me that Tyler tried so desperately to break, has never been stronger. I wake up each morning grateful for another day of freedom, another day of being heard, another day of mattering in a world that too often treats the elderly as invisible. If my story has taught me anything, it's that we're never too old to fight for ourselves, never too weak to demand respect, never too isolated to reach out for help. The bruises fade, but the strength we find in surviving them becomes part of who we are forever. To anyone who might be living in the shadows of abuse, trapped by fear or shame or the terrible belief that you somehow deserve what's happening to you, you don't. You deserve safety, dignity, and love. Your age doesn't disqualify you from those basic human rights. Your relationship to your abuser doesn't mean you have to endure their cruelty in silence. Find your voice, even if it shakes. Reach out for help, even if you're scared. Take that first painful step toward freedom, even if you don't know where it will lead. I promise you, the view from the other side of survival is worth every ounce of courage it takes to get there. At 87, I'm not the same woman who fell on that kitchen floor 7 years ago, too shocked and broken to believe what was happening to her. I'm Eleanor Patterson, survivor, advocate, and living proof that it's never too late to reclaim your power and rewrite your story. The little boy who once called me his angel grandma tried to steal my wings, but he didn't realize that angels are made of stronger stuff than he imagined. And sometimes, the most powerful thing an angel can do is refuse to be silenced. If this story touched your heart or opened your eyes to the reality of elder abuse, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories of survival, strength, and hope. Your support helps us continue sharing these important voices and raising awareness about issues that affect our most vulnerable community members. Together, we can ensure that no one suffers in silence.